So this is two huge topics colliding together. Social media, this massive technology that we all use every day with the healthcare system. And we have an hour in which to do it. Unfortunately, maybe not unfortunately, but as I went through this, we realized that the social media and healthcare delivery can't really be siloed. So we'll be going over a lot of different topics and how these two relate to each other. But I would like to get started with a polling question first. True or false? I am scrolling through social media right now. Who's on Facebook, TikTok, Twitter? It's okay. This is a no judgment zone. If you are, I totally understand. So forget that. All false, 100%. Is anyone playing on Facebook right now? It's totally fine if you are. All right. Okay, good, 13%. I like starting this off with a little bit of trust. Thank you. And then overall, I think the effect of social media on my relationships has been, and how do you think, in general, social media has affected relationships? All right, so far it looks like we've got mostly good to neutral. All right. So either way, it doesn't seem like everyone feels too strongly either way, which is good because we will be going over the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media and its impact on healthcare delivery and relationships and how that affects healthcare delivery. So thank you all for your participation in that. Okay, so first let's, what is this thing? What is social media? It's all these different platforms that we talk about, you hear about on the news, that we all use constantly. It's a digital technology that lets people share content, ideas, or interests. That's it. We can use it to different platforms for different purposes. So for the terminology, I'm going to use social media and online. I will probably use these interchangeably. I mean the same thing, a space where we interact with others over the internet. I will say offline, or I might say in real life, to refer to things that take place that are not in social media. That's not to say that I don't think that what happens on social media is not real life. I'm just sort of using these terminologies. I just want to say that life that takes place off of social media. I do think that what happens on social media is in fact real life. But why is it important? It has 4 properties that make it very impactful. It is online, which we can now access wherever we want. It is instantaneous, it is quite powerful, and it is everywhere. It is a tool that can be used to increase awareness. However, it can also be used to help and hurt the way that we spread information and our relationships. Use, of course, I think everyone knows, in the past 15 years, it has exploded. I remember a platform called Friendster, and then, of course, there was MySpace. When Friendster was out, nobody was using it. It was something that nerds, such as myself, used at a box at a computer that you sat at. And MySpace was very similar. And then Facebook rose with the rise with smartphones, and it has then exploded and become all these platforms that we know about today. So first we're going to now look at the how many people are on this thing. Facebook, and this, I want to say this chart is in millions. So Facebook has 2.85 billion users. YouTube has 1.8 billion. WhatsApp, 2 billion now. The average American spends just over 2 hours a day on social media. That works out to a month a year. We spend a month a year on social media. Over 51% of the global population uses it. I make no value judgment about this use because I use it plenty. But this is a significant portion of our lives that we are spending on it, and an even bigger part of our waking hours. So we'd like to talk about some of the good that social media can do, especially in terms of healthcare and disease. It can absolutely increase awareness of that disease and help reduce stigma around it. Patients are able to share their stories. They're able to interact with the public and other patient without physical barriers. That can also be used to help facilitate education and contact and even protest over issues that are important to members of that community. Collective action with online is much easier. That can influence mainstream media. I don't know how many times I think a Twitter campaign has become a part of the media discourse. That happens weekly, more than that, I think. Individuals online can raise questions and issues to organizations and to powerful people that they would not be able to access otherwise. And it also provides a safe space for professionals to interact with each other, with their colleagues, to share ideas. The Echo, I think I recognize some of y'all from there. That's social media. So we can interact with each other, share ideas and best practices. And I wanted to highlight a particular example. This is Tito Oye. She's a sickle cell patient in the UK. For several years now, she's been posting on Instagram. She has a blog called Her Sickled Journey, and she posts about her treatment and just her life with sickle cell. And there were two quotes of hers that I thought really addressed one of the wonderful things that social media can do for patients and for people in general. She says how she can make meaningful connections with members of the sickle cell community, doctors all over the world. They share information and tips with each other as well as their hurts and concerns. She said that she started to share about her sickle cell journey to make sure that other people around the world with sickle cell disease could relate to someone, and so that they would know that they are not alone, and to raise awareness so that they have a better understanding of that condition. So if you just Google Her Sickled Journey, if you want to find out more about her, you can see all of the things that she writes about. She's very out there, very online, and I think this just shows the power for good that social media can have for patients and for sickle cell patients as well. So in terms of healthcare delivery, when I was researching for this, I was really struck by the positive, almost optimistic tone still that people are using about social media. So this was a couple years ago. An online professional blog wrote an article discussing the great benefits for patients, the ability for providers to connect with younger patients, and the ability of patients to build communities. And I thought, well, that does seem a little, now in the year of our Lord, at this point, 2020, that we're still sort of writing starry-eyed about all the wonderful things that social media can do. So I did hope to see that maybe they wrote some challenges or even downsides that could occur. And they did. The challenges mentioned were, of course, HIPAA compliance, what they called information accuracy, but I think now we might call health misinformation, professionalism, as well as time constraints. They did say as well, the spread of misinformation on social media impacts the work of public health professionals, hinders their ability to keep the public informed. Public health organizations and professionals must continually monitor the spread of health information and dispel myths by providing research-supported resources to the public. So this is more work for everyone with social media. You now have to combat misinformation. So we talk about memes, and this is a method by which information or misinformation can be spread. Meme just really means something that spreads. That was the original meaning of it. Something mimetic is something that just sort of replicates itself from person to person within a culture. Of course, now that concept has now become to mean something on the internet, which is usually a funny picture with a pithy phrase that is then spread widely, goes viral on social media. It's, I think, probably the best way of showing the ability of social media to spread an idea extremely rapidly. Some memes achieved worldwide popularity within a few days, and I think now probably we're down to a few hours. The incident that occurred last week at the Oscars, I believe, might be one of the quickest ways to show that this is down to minutes, how quickly a meme just spreads thanks to how connected we all are on social media. In terms of healthcare, I still think the most outstanding example was the Ice Bucket Challenge several years ago. That ended up having 3 million people make videos in under 3 weeks and raised more than $100 million for the ALS Association, which is even more striking to me because ALS is a rare disease. And it did go viral because it had the perfect combination of it was easy to do. You could just dump water on your head. You got to show off. Who doesn't like that? And it was a competition. You would call people out and challenge them to throw water on their head and donate. And yeah, I think it was still the most phenomenal example. I believe a medication was developed because of the money that was done for ALS. But this same process can not only cause people to raise money for organizations or even spread true information, it can be used to spread misinformation. And I think still the most relevant example that we have now is COVID. In July 2020, so this was shortly after the pandemic started, this is how soon it was, the Pew Research Center did a study and learned that of people who got their news primarily from social media were more likely to believe incorrect or inaccurate information about COVID. So I believe there really has been a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of agonizing over how this happens. How does, especially with COVID's really brought it to the forefront, but how does this misinformation spread? Studies have shown that false information spreads more quickly than true information over social media. Negative stories are shared more than positive ones, and I think we've had plenty of those in the past couple years. And surprising stories, which I also think we've had plenty of in the past couple of years, they tend to get shared more than unsurprising ones. So there's a lot of things taking place here. One is that really it's an information overload. You are scrolling, information. It's very difficult to constructively and critically engage with everything coming at you. Add to that, we have just a cognitive bias that takes place in all of us, in all of our brains, where we believe stories that reinforce what we already believe to be true. And we'll get into why in just a moment. And then, of course, on social media platforms, they have their own confirmation bias, where once any article or a piece of information starts to get popular, it will then be promoted because of its own popularity. So this process, this is a really hardwired behavior that we have in our brain that social media really takes advantage of or works off of. So we do have brain structures that look out for our social needs, because those are very, very important to us. And they release dopamine when we succeed socially. You post something, you get likes, you get comments, dopamine. But these same brain structures are looking to protect us from negative social experiences. And another thing that we do is we are constantly, as we go throughout our days, engage with the world, our brains are constantly comparing the world out there to our own core beliefs about how the world should be. And when there is a discrepancy between the two, the brain perceives a threat. Now, right now, this process is very, very popular, I think, for years, regards to politics and how we discuss politics online. But I have seen this develop over anything. Child-raising opinions, Star Wars, does pineapple belong on pizza? I have seen people get into knockdown, drag-out fights because of this brain process. So it's not just serious things. Anything can set this off. And it happens, and the reason that it happens so powerfully is because of the brain structures that are involved. So when the brain perceives a threat, says, this thing in the external world is different from what I think, it immediately activates the amygdala, which is a deep brain structure, and this causes a stress response. And I think it's also really important to note that these processes don't think. At no point do the executive functions of your frontal lobes get involved with this at all. They just react. That's it. It's very quick. That's why you see something online that makes you upset, you disagree with it. So immediately this feeling in you might see red, you might go tight in your gut. It's because it's that fast happening. Of course, this process causes stress, which can have negative consequences. It can be severe for people who need to avoid stress, such as sickle cell patients. And the stress is also bad for people such as healthcare providers whose jobs are already stressful. So it's important to remember as well, when we're on social media, we're getting bombarded with a lot of negative stories because that's what's being promoted. And this, combined with the constant scrolling, puts our brains into a very agitated state. So and it's also important to note that this threat response is extremely strong. This is why, I don't know, I'm sure if you felt cute, posted a selfie, and you get 50 comments telling you how good you look, that's nice. One person tells you your hair looks bad. Which one do you focus on? It's because we are highly tuned for social danger. And when I say social danger, I just don't mean these brain structures evolved at a time when social danger meant you were expelled from the group and you died. So which is why they are think first, ask questions later. They are here to keep you alive. Furthermore, if you add trauma from a painful illness or abuse or neglect, these reactions can be even stronger and potentially more of a psychological risk factor or biological risk factor for patients for whom stress is a risk factor. And oftentimes we will say to ourselves, why are you so upset? Or we might say to someone else, why are you so upset? It's just Facebook, it's not real, it's just Twitter, it's not real. It feels real to the parts of our brains that are reacting like this. They did not evolve to determine the difference between something that happens on a computer and something that happens in real life. They just know that they registered a social danger response and reacted appropriately. So not only when we tell ourselves it's not real, it's just Facebook, we're already adding feeling bad because of this stress response, but now we're feeling bad for feeling bad. So that's not great. Now, I don't want to say, I know what you're thinking, because I don't know what you're thinking, but this is what I would be thinking after all that. Thanks for the neurology lesson, but who cares? Well, the algorithms of social media do. The social media is for-profit companies that, and the platforms themselves are governed by algorithms which analyze not just the content everyone interacts with, but the content that you interact with. The social media companies, and this is for better or for worse, are not here to provide us with a free and open space for the communication of ideas. They are for-profit companies which have one interest, and that is to make money. And these algorithms are designed to increase your engagement and thus increase money for the social media company that made the platform. The algorithms themselves were designed by psychologists, computer scientists, engineers, and marketing departments. It's important to note, all of humanity was not suddenly 15 years ago stricken with a genetic defect that made us all narcissists. There was not a pandemic of a brain-eating virus that suddenly made us believe every single thing that pops up on the news feed. What happened was that these platforms have been engineered to keep us scrolling and posting. And especially the random reward system that they work by, which is you post something and you don't know when you're going to get that like, you don't know when you're going to get that comment, so you keep coming back to see if you're going to get it. You're going to get that dopamine hit. That was determined by psychologist B.F. Skinner a long, long time ago. What are called intermittent variable rewards, or random rewards, are one of the most effective ways to motivate repeated behavior, i.e. getting you back on and scrolling again. You never know when those likes and notifications are going to come in. You never know when your next dopamine hit's going to be, so you keep checking Facebook to see if they're there. So they got us on it, and then of course they will curate the content that you see based on the content that you interact with. This naturally leads to greater confirmation bias, which then of course can lead to greater conflict online and stress. So all of this means it can come together, that it can really can harm our relationships or stress them. And paradoxically, this increased connectivity and combined with the increased stress can lead us to dehumanize other people. I've seen this happen with friends, I've seen it happen with family members, strangers, just countless times online. Dehumanizing others, we often think of that in terms of it means that we hate them or it means that we're cruel to them, but it unfortunately really more often results in indifference towards people who we perceive of as the other. And this can lead us to ignore them, treat them like they are children, or to deny them autonomy. Even in spaces that are supposed to be supportive and caring, I've seen communities that fracture over minor disagreements, and this snowballs out of control. And this failure to see other people as living their own complicated lives on the other side of the screen can impair our ability to form and maintain relationships with them, which I think really comes back to what Dr. Smith was talking about at the beginning of this conference. We cannot reach out and understand others. It is impossible to do so when we view them as simple, two-dimensional characters, or that they are so infantilized that they cannot think and act for themselves. And this is, I think, one of the greatest dangers of social media in terms of relationships. And so, of course, this does bleed over into the relationship between patients and providers. So on the plus side, of course, because it's not all bad, there's a lot of good here. Social media can affect the relationships positively between patients and providers by providing an equal harmonious communication between patients and providers. It can make relationships more harmonious. It absolutely can when people interact well. Patients who are online, engaged on social media, can feel more empowered to follow physician recommendations and treatment plans. And you can get health advice online, which is great. Contrary-wise, patients are more prone to pay attention to more negative reviews of doctors. I don't know how many times I've been on Amazon and I see something that has maybe got 4.8 stars, thousands of comments. This is great, this is great, this is great. 1 star, it blew up, or something. And I'm like, not gonna buy that. People do that with doctors. Patients are more likely to switch doctors due to social media. And I think that's important to realize. It's one thing to switch a PCP. It's quite easy to do. But with a rare disease like sickle cell disease, where there is a shortage of specialists, how does doctor switching affect the care that these patients receive? Do they switch from their sickle cell doctor to the emergency room? Where do they switch to? Of course, as we've seen, social media can lead between patients and providers to damaged relationships and suboptimal interactions. And of course, it is just like it's good, it's bad that you can get health advice online sometimes. And so really, I want to point out this is a two-way street. I believe that a lot of the research that I found was focused on the sort of the patient experience with interacting with doctors online. However, I was also curious to know, and I don't know, but how this can go the other way, because I really do think this is a two-way street. If a patient and provider have a negative interaction on social media, that can absolutely bleed over and negatively impact that patient-provider relationship. But if, let's say, a provider sees a patient spreading what that provider believes to be health disinformation online, does that affect the care that that provider gives to the patient? If a patient gets into an argument with a provider on social media, how does that affect their future interactions with that provider and with providers as a whole? I think these are very, very important questions that we should really need to be mindful of with just social media is here to stay. So with these problems, of course, it's how do we fix them? And the short answer is nobody knows. I'm sorry. The longer answer comes down to let's hope the companies that make social media platforms, let's hope they change the algorithms to combat misinformation. Now, that's a great hope. I'm personally not holding my breath for it. I believe recently, I want to say it was maybe just a couple months ago, it could have been a couple years ago, COVID has really, really messed up my time-telling ability. But Facebook, this wasn't even a political thing, but Facebook via Instagram was very, very aware that a lot of the models that they were posting and the female, images of women's bodies were causing psychological distress, eating disorders, depression, I believe even up to suicidal ideation in teenage girls and young women. And they were aware of this for years, but they didn't change anything. It took, I believe, getting hauled in front of Congress for them to address it and then to begin to, according to them, take steps. So personally, I'm not very optimistic about social media platforms proactively working to combat misinformation. And furthermore, some advice comes down to, well, it's users. It's the users. They need to be more critical about how they consume all this news. They need to pay attention to sources and fact-checking. Or they say, I believe it's quite glib, I've seen normalize changing your opinion when presented with new information. Researchers at UC Berkeley have suggested that when combating medical misinformation, it's not helpful to respond with facts and numbers, and they recommend a more personal tone and narrative, to engage with personal narratives and to let real patients tell their stories. Dr. Smith knows I say this all the time, and as a data person, it's been one of the hardest things for me to learn. Pathos beats logos, emotion beats logic, feelings beat data. We are not computers. We are not information sponges this is why I believe that just normalized changing your opinion is an inaccurate piece of advice. We're not sitting here absorbing information, looking for reasons to change our beliefs about how the world works. We build our worldviews based on just a complicated, glorious stew of personal experiences, feelings, culture, biases, and yes, data. And regardless of whether or not we admit this to ourselves, our worldviews have a personal, emotional truth to them. And throwing facts and numbers will not break through to that. These worldviews must be engaged with at an emotional narrative level. In fact, this happened to me in real life. I have a friend who's he loves science. He's a very believes science type of guy. And when COVID was starting and some of the first bits of health misinformation were coming out, he was saying, well, we just need to give them the facts. We just need to how do we get facts out there? And I sent him 2 of these studies. I believe they were the UC Berkeley studies. And I said, hey, that actually doesn't work. These studies have shown that throwing facts and figures and science at people doesn't change minds. And his response was, I don't believe that. So this is the perfect example of how even people who believe that they believe science and change their opinions and worldviews based on new data, we don't. And it's fine. We just need to learn how to interact with it and be mindful of it. So other than saying that, this is bad, what do we do? And no one can fix it. What do we do? Well, social media is here to stay. And unfortunately, as I said, social media companies, unless if they are, their feet are held to the fire, they do not seem all that interested in fixing practices that they have found to be profitable. So I have found this woman, her name is Sirut Chawla. She is a psychotherapist in the UK who's really spent a lot of time thinking and writing about how we treat ourselves and each other online. And one of the things that she keeps coming back to is that we need to learn online to value ourselves. And I personally don't think that we get enough messages to value ourselves in the real world, and we definitely don't get enough to do that online. So in order to protect our mental health and reduce stress and to create these harmonious relationships that can enhance not just the patient-provider relationship, but all of our relationships online, I think we do have to learn to value ourselves. So don't expose your mental health to rudeness. Boundary violations are a big one. Now, of course, those things are, I think, abuse and harassment, but they don't always have to be malicious. It really can just look like someone feeling entitled to your time and energy. And again, that's not always because they're trying to be cruel. The instantaneous nature of these communications, they've led us to expect things from each other instantaneously. So you feel pressure to respond, to be available immediately, and that can be extraordinarily stressful. And so when people are expecting you to constantly be available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, instantaneously, that can feel like a boundary violation. It's probably because it is. So it's good. I have learned to, mine is to, I turn the notifications, I have them off most of the time, but I don't answer phone calls after 10. My friends say, if you have an emergency after 10, don't call Ben, and that's my boundary. Of course, yours might be different, and that's totally fine. There's bad faith assumptions, and how you know online you're about to come across a bad faith assumption. It's 5 words. So what you're saying is. So if you say something and someone says, so what you're saying is, they're about to put words in your mouth, probably acting out of bad faith. You can even say something simple like, I prefer mangoes to oranges. Comment, why do you hate oranges? Bad faith assumption. Don't expose yourself to that. Unkindness, argument baiting, and impoliteness. Block, delete, peace out. I've started turning off comment notifications on Threads when I could see that things were starting to get out of hand. It was tough at first. It was tough to hit that turn off notifications button, but it improved my life immediately by a whole 3%, and that's a pretty big jump for such a small action. But I do think really that valuing ourselves will really not only help us to value ourselves, but will help us to value others and will increase the ability of social media to create and maintain healthy communities and relationships. Just want to wrap it up. Social media is an enormously powerful technology that lets us connect instantly with each other, to share information and build community. Like all technologies, there are good sides and bad sides to that. I think we've seen social media can have a positive impact on sickle cell patients and sickle cell providers attempting to educate, reduce stigma, and connect with each other. All patients anywhere can connect with each other and form communities. However, it can also harm stress, harm relationships, and can harm the patient-provider relationship, the patient-patient relationship, and the relationships among providers. And unfortunately, nobody has solutions to all these problems. This is still a very new technology. I think we forget that. So in the meantime, it couldn't hurt to practice more kindness to ourselves and to each other online.